March 13th, 2020. It's Friday morning. The world was shutting down. A new disease, COVID-19, was spreading at an alarming rate. No one knew exactly how dangerous it was. News, rumors, and fear combined to create a fog of uncertainty and anxiety. Suddenly, restaurants, offices, gyms, and churches were closed. Grocery store shelves were empty, from food to medicine to toilet paper. Purchases of essentials were being rationed at stores. Families worldwide were notified that schools were being put on hold. Personally, my family thought it was an overreaction, but when you're handed a week off from school, you don't complain. Swine flu in 2009, Ebola in 2016. If you read the newspapers, these viruses seemed like the end of the world. But within a couple months, as with most news stories, they were completely forgotten. COVID eventually proved to be way more serious than we gave it credit for. At the time of writing, almost 2 years later, we're still recovering. But for my family, we came out the other side pretty much unscathed. So it might as well have just been another one of those overhyped news stories. It was still a scary, kind of uncertain time, but we still had food storage, stable income, a strong internet connection. So I spent all day gardening and pretending to listen to my teachers. But what about kids who weren't in my family's situation? What was it like for kids who didn't have a dad that already worked from home? For kids who didn't have a mom who could put her career on hold and support them all day? For kids who didn't have a reliable source of food outside of school? For kids who couldn't afford to watch Netflix and Disney Plus all day? What was it like to be a kid from one of America's low-income families during the pandemic? For parents of low-income families, COVID presented massive challenges when it came to supporting their children. One of the most important, but not often mentioned functions of schools is as state-provided childcare. Normally, kids spend anywhere from 7 to 8 of their waking hours at school. And if before and after school activities are taken into account, the number can be even higher. Sending kids off to school frees up time for the parents to go work. During the pandemic, elementary school-aged kids needed somebody with them all day to help them log into classes and do homework. In families where one parent earned the majority of the income, the other parent could fulfill this responsibility. But for low-income families, you can't just do that. Working parents can't afford to leave their job and stay at home with their kids all day. Parents being unavailable because they had to financially support their children was the source of a good chunk of the problems that low-income families faced. Parents were supposed to support their special needs students at home with only occasional check-ins from the special education teacher. My mother took a partial leave of absence to log in and sit next to my autistic brother in his virtual classes to keep him from failing his freshman year of high school. If parents couldn't be there, students with disabilities lacked the necessary support that they were legally provided in public school settings. Families who qualified for free and reduced lunch had to drive to free meal locations. According to research by Mason Brink, many children receive 2 out of 3 meals from their public school system. And if those parents couldn't leave work to drive their kids to a meal pickup location twice a day, the kids were left hanging. Parents needed to independently set up social interactions and study groups if they expected their kids to develop in the absence of schools. Children of impoverished families were often in a kind of survival mode, and they were left to older siblings and grandparents with limited interaction with peers outside their family. All of the skills that are taught in a preschool setting, like sitting on a rug, paying attention, playing with blocks, holding crayons, using scissors, those never got taught. And those might seem like kind of trivial things, but developmentally, those are essential fine motor and social skills. Parents were expected to help their kids use unfamiliar iPads and software. And if they couldn't, then grandparents and older siblings had to learn. My mother, who works at a Title I elementary school where 90% of the students have free or reduced lunch, drove to students' homes to teach parents how to scan a QR code with an iPad camera. With all these obstacles, it's not hard to understand why only 5 to 7 out of my mother's 20 kindergarten students regularly logged into class. And there are more problems than just the ones caused by kids not having support from a parent or a teacher. Since teachers are some of the biggest sources of abuse referrals, reports from Title I schools have fallen drastically since the start of the pandemic. Education Week found that across different studies, reports of abuse fell anywhere from 27 to 40% because of a lack of school referrals. While reports of abuse have fallen, Canada's Department of Pediatrics found a higher rate of injuries indicative of abuse among impoverished children. They're still being abused, they're just not being reported. So academic development was set back too. According to the World Economic Forum,
low-income communities had extreme losses in writing and reading since the start. Some of these losses were as severe as 1 month of regression for every month of lockdown. So losses were way worse for low-income communities than high-income communities. An article from Education Week found that at the start of the pandemic, 16 to 60% of children and teenagers exhibited signs of distress, anxiety, and depression. In addition, some of their studies found that students in poverty had higher rates of anxiety than their peers. This is a mess. So there's lots of potential solutions. More food distribution programs, a new consolidated curriculum, longer school years, summer school for all, after-school tutoring, large-scale counseling, social development programs. But as we've discovered, most of these solutions fail to consider families who are in survival mode. Anything that requires additional time from parents is bound to run into the exact same problems as before. Kids are resilient, but they need scaffolding. What's clearest to me is that this situation is never going to be resolved if leadership continues to overlook the unique challenges of low-income families. We need to continue to learn about how everyone was impacted by the pandemic differently. We need to hear from people whose voices aren't normally heard. They need to be represented in the places where decisions are made. I'm still learning about low-income families and how the pandemic affected them. Maybe other people are learning too. All I can hope for is that one day we'll begin to make progress and welcome in these low-income families and kids, our brothers and sisters from the margins. Thank you for watching to the end of the video, and bye.